First impressions of War of the Ring. Ba-da-ba, ba-ba-ba. Ba-da-ba, ba-ba-ba. To that note, to that end, Mordor got heftily defeated, promptly destroyed, and summarily dismissed by the Fellowship of the Ring. I played as Sauron and as the armies of Mordor, or the armies of Shadow, and my brother played as the Free People armies and the Fellowship of the Ring. And he handily beat me. This is a really interesting game because it requires you to juggle quite a few things. And it's one of the most lauded two-player long-form strategy games. I mean long-form in the sense it's 3 to 6 hours. It was a lot of fun. I did enjoy it quite a bit. It's usually in the category where they compare it to stuff like Star Wars Rebellion, which I've played and I love. And I do think I maybe prefer Rebellion still, but this was a good experience. And I've got 2 expansions for this that I want to dive into. And from what I've read over the last couple days, it seems like Warriors of Middle-earth adds some good stuff, but maybe isn't as essential. And it seems like a lot of people think Lords of Middle-earth is one that you should really have in rotation most of the time, depending on what you like, but also based off of the majority of reviews I've seen. This is a massive tabletop experience where you are reenacting the events of the Lord of the Rings or of Middle-earth, where one person is the Shadow armies, where they have the Easterlings, and they have Isengard with the Uruk-hai and all that stuff, and the goblins with the Warg Riders. And then you have the classic Sauron's army, which is spread throughout, you've got the Mouth, you've got the Witch King, but you've also got all the Nazgul. And then they're spread across several different areas. There's some strongholds that are near the Elven realms, and then up north, north of the Shire. And then you also have kind of the main area of Mordor in the corner of the map. And then the Free People's armies are spread out. What's interesting about this game is that it is asymmetric, similar to Star Wars Rebellion, and there is a certain element of guerrilla tactics and also slow playing resistance over the course of the game for the Free People armies, because Mordor and Isengard, they start much more closer, kind of one space away from being at war. They're already active, they're not passive, they're already active, but they're also very close to being just labeled at war. And what that means is they're able to muster, they're able to grow. So they're much closer to popping out of the shadows and being a nasty presence on the board than the rest of the human armies, or the Free People's armies, not humans. So the Free People armies, there are 5 of them. And so instead of the Shadow player controlling 3 armies, of which are very quickly able to muster and able to grow and able to be a problem, then you have the Free People armies, which narratively aren't active yet. They aren't aware of the threat of Shadow. And so 3 or 4 of the 5, when you start the game, are actually passive. And you have to activate them on your own, or through the effects of the Shadow, they can activate as well. However, it essentially means that you are behind from the beginning. You're playing behind, and you're trying to get your armies active to where you can start to recognize the threat of the Shadow and start to muster, start to bring troops out. The only difficulty is that the Shadow army has an additional advantage. Not only are they closer to being ready to muster and to grow and to spread across the map, they're also infinite. If you kill them, you still get those pieces back. They go back to the general supply because they have a much larger force that they can just continually bring up. And, half of them are entities or enemies or creatures that are spawned from the death of the Free People. And so you're not worried about troop supply. However, the Free People's armies, they have a finite inventory, or not inventory, they have a finite supply of soldiers. when they die, they actually die, and you don't like they go into a separate supply. And so whenever the shadow player is able to kill forces of the free people, it's a permanent loss, and it's definitely you're feeling the threat of that and the danger of that whenever you have a combat. However, there's two sides of things. There's two sides of this fight. It's not just a physical presence on the map, it's also this hidden movement-ish game with the Fellowship of the Ring, and the Fellowship is trying to move while staying hidden and not being revealed. They're trying to move across the map and make their way from Rivendell when the Fellowship forms all the way over to Mordor and to Mount Doom so that, they can ascend the steps there of Mount Doom. And if the Free People player is able to make it up to Mount Doom and get all the way to the Crack of Doom and drop the ring before they're fully corrupted, they win. However, if the Shadow, through revealing and finding them throughout their journey and also corrupting them along the way, corrupting the ring bearer Frodo, if they're able to fully corrupt Frodo before he's able to make it to the Crack of Doom, then the Shadow player wins. That's that side of the game. And then on the other side, you have that physical presence that's always there, always in your face, and always lurking as a danger. And what that is that there's a point system there. There are places that are worth 1 point, places that are worth 2 points. And those are most frequently attributed to players through the axis of strongholds. There are smaller, like settlements, that are just worth the 1 point, but they're not as frequent and they're not as hard to take over. The strongholds are a much meatier location that does take quite a bit of effort and consistent siege to win. And that's where the military aspect of the game comes into play, because the Shadow player has to take over 10 points worth of territory. And then the Free People, if they do win a physical confrontation, they only have to take 2 of those strongholds, or 4 points total from the Shadow. Each of those things sounds maybe a little bit more attainable than you'd think at first, but that's because you just don't know how hard stronghold fighting is. When you are laying siege to a stronghold, it is a substantial effort. You have to have these elite forces if you want the siege to last anything beyond 1 round, and you are desperately trying to lay your combat cards, which are also event cards. They have a dual functionality. The top half of them is an event, and the bottom half of them is an offensive or defensive maneuver within a fight. And it is just, it is brutal to have those fights to try and win those strongholds. So you've got these two sides, these two opposing sides to how the game is played. You have this Fellowship of the Ring that is moving across the map and occasionally popping up and changing locations as it's revealed or as it chooses to declare itself in a location. And that process is trying to make its way over to Mount Doom. Then you have this other side of things where you have this massive conflict on the board that is playing out the conflict. And it's a little bit of reenacting the original story of Middle-earth and of The Lord of the Rings. And then it's also, on the flip side of things, this big what if, where you could go in the more, like when I played with my brother, I chose some of the more thematic fights in the game. I attacked Osgiliath and then moved on to lay siege to Minas Tirith. I went from Isengard and I attacked Helm's Deep. Helm's Deep. And so there's definitely an opportunity to reenact parts of the movies or parts of the books, whichever form of media you preferred. But there's also this big what if where you can kind of be like, you know what? Like I took the Easterlings up the eastern side of the map and I attacked the dwarven kingdoms in the north. And that's not something that happens in the movies or in the books. But it's possible because of the nature of a strategy game that you can explore and take advantage of what your opponent is or is not doing. There's a lot of stuff that's of interest here. I'm nervous about jumping back into this again and again because I know that the designers of this are re-implementing it and doing Dune War for Arrakis with Simon, and that Kickstarter is starting this month. And so I'm well aware that I could play that game or try that game out and then get to the point where I realize, you know what, I really like the sci-fi setting, which is usually more what I lean towards. I lean towards sci-fi setting over fantasy. But I do have an affinity and appreciation for Lord of the Rings. So this was still a very fun experience. I was very thankful to my brother. I've just had a couple games in the last 2 weeks where people have taught me the huge game that I didn't have to take the effort to read through the rules for. So this was a lot of fun. To go back to what I said earlier about liking Star Wars Rebellion, maybe a little bit more than this, just based off of one play, mind you. I've played Rebellion 5-6 times. I've only had the one experience. I did lose. That really didn't play into me being frustrated. I was a little bit frustrated as to the action selection of the game. So in this game, you roll dice, and those dice determine the actions that you are able to negotiate or go after. And there is some flexibility there. You've got event cards that can mix things up and do actions that maybe you wouldn't be able to otherwise. You've got, whether you're the free people and you've already used or you're using them, or whether the free people have already used them and you're the shadow. There's elven rings, like rings of power, that you can use to change dice results, but those are limited over the course of the entire game. So I felt a little bit of restriction. And I know that restriction is intentional. It's there to create adaptability and flexibility in the strategy making that you're doing as a player. But also, there's only so much that design can do to constrain bad luck or bad statistics. And so, you can have maybe one round where you roll poorly and you're not able to really do much because of that. And then you have other rounds where it's just no matter what, like if you keep rolling bad, it can cumulatively be frustrating. And I had that experience quite a few times, both in the actions I was trying to do, because as the Mordor player, you do have a dice advantage over the free people because of the amount of forces you have, because of the characters you can bring in. You start off and then can maintain a dice advantage in terms of numbers, which means numbers of actions as well. But if you ever roll the Eye of Sauron, you have to allocate it to the hunt, which is it de-incentivizes the player to journey with the Fellowship because it makes it more likely that I'll roll a 6 because I'm rolling more dice. The only issue with that is I had numerous times throughout the game where I just rolled like half or more than half of my dice as eyes, and it made it to where, yes, they weren't incentivized to go and journey that particular turn, but it also made it to where I had so few actions, and it really made for some impotent moments for me, which was frustrating. And I do like the event cards. I like the event cards that can be both event and combat focused. The only issue is that dice allocation for what you're doing, your action on your turn, felt a lot more limiting to me as a player in terms of devising a strategy than in Star Wars Rebellion. You have the missions that you can send leaders on, and you choose however many missions you want to go on and however many leaders you want to allocate to those missions to make them more likely to succeed. And then on the flip side of things, you can leave leaders not even used on missions, and those are ones that can enact physical movements on the board. And so that combination of deciding what missions you want to try to go for, which leaders you think would help you complete it, the worry of which missions the other player has that are directly only used in opposition for what I'm trying to achieve, or will make it to where I regret putting certain leaders in certain missions because then I can't use them to oppose other missions that the other player's doing. That whole decision space to me is a lot more, it's probably a lot more, paralysis inducing for players that struggle to come up with maybe a cohesive strategy without worrying constantly about what the other player is going to do. But if you don't have that, it is a much more exciting interplay of decision space whenever you're trying to figure out what you want to do. And so I just really enjoy that in Rebellion, and I kind of missed that because there are so many elements of this that do give off a vibe of Star Wars Rebellion for me. You have, in Star Wars Rebellion, you have the Empire, which is able to field a much larger army than the Rebellion, which is similar to the Shadow and the Free People in here. And then you also have this little bit of a hidden element where the Fellowship is trying to stay hidden as it moves across the board. It's not actively moving whenever you move if it's hidden. You just will trace how many steps away from your last location you're going to be on the next one. But in Rebellion, you have the base of the rebels is hidden, and you're trying to make sure that you evade that base being found over the course of time. And so there are just certain elements of Rebellion that I like more, but I'm very excited to jump back into this. I want to try the Lords of the Middle-earth expansion probably first, and then I may bring in the Warriors of the Middle-earth expansion later, but I definitely want to jump into this again now that I know how to play, now that I know kind of some of the strategy. I attacked strongholds way too early in the last one without amassing a large enough force, and I think I would have the time to amass a large enough force, so I should definitely do that next time. So I've learned how to play a little bit better, and I've also learned maybe some of the strategy of the different groups, but I also want to check out the expansions to see how this feels going forward. So this is War of the Ring, first impressions. I had a good time. Really appreciated my brother for teaching me how to play, and I cannot wait to try it again sometime. Hope you guys have a good one. Let me know, have you played this? Have you played Star Wars Rebellion? What are your thoughts? Are you interested in the new Dune game that's coming out? Let me know what you're thinking. All right. Have a good one. Bye.